Hi, and welcome to Customer Value and Beyond. I'm Stephen Lewandowski, and I'm honored to have you join us. Every Wednesday at 5 p.m. CET, we will spill some insights we collected over the years in B2B SaaS, customer success, and building high-performing teams. And we'll also be tackling your burning questions you might have around the latest industry buzz. Feel free to share some questions with us via the comment function, via LinkedIn, and share your questions, share your topics, and we will try to get to it. Today, I'm super excited to have someone very special with me who I would call an old friend, who I've met in Berlin, in London, and probably also somewhere in the Silicon Valley. So with no further ado, let me introduce you to Dan Steinman. And Dan, welcome to the show. And why don't you kick it off with maybe a little bit about yourself and maybe something we can't find on your LinkedIn profile. Welcome to the session, Dan. Very excited.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm really happy to be here. It was great to get an email from you a couple of weeks ago, reconnecting, because it's been a while since we chatted, but we always enjoyed hanging out and talking shop or talking about almost anything. So this will just be a continuation of our lifelong conversation, or several years long conversation anyway. So so I've been around for a while. I live in Silicon Valley. I met Stephen probably before I moved to London, but I spent 4 years living in London running the EMEA team for Gainsight. So feels like I'm maybe slightly back in EMEA right now with many of you, I'm sure. This was actually a tough question that Stephen asked me. What would I say about myself that's not on my LinkedIn profile? I think this isn't going to be startling, maybe, but it'll be surprising to most people, because the way most people know me is either because we've worked at the same company where I was likely an executive, because I have been for the last 20 years or so. So on stage, talking or going to board meetings or whatever, or more likely people know me because I've done a ton of public speaking in the last 10 years or so. I spent so much time on stage in front of lots of people. And I think then most people would be surprised to find out that on the introvert extrovert scale, I'm very far on the introvert side. And even people who know me don't believe that. But I think it's a misunderstanding of what that scale actually means. Introvert doesn't mean you don't like people. It just means you don't get energy from large groups of people. So for me, one of the tasks that I always had to do as an executive was you go to these dinners or kind of mixers, for cocktails and whatever, and there's 100 people in the room, and your job is to shake hands with as many of them as possible and make connections and whatever. That for me was the worst nightmare of my life, going into a crowded room of people I don't know and having to go around and actually meet everybody. And my sincere hope whenever I had to do that would be, I hope the very first person I meet is really, really interesting and only wants to talk to one other person the whole night, so we can go off in the corner and just talk to each other the whole night, and I don't have to go around and meet the other 99 people. So
That's so good.
Yeah, we overcome those shortcomings, right? As we all have some of those kinds of things. And it's not really a shortcoming, but to get up on stage, for most people, it seems like that you can't be an introvert and do that. And I'm here to say to all the introverts, that's not true. It's not that you don't like people. It's not that you're afraid of people. It's just that you don't get your energy from other people. So.
And that's so great. And we didn't prepare this, and I'm super surprised actually as well. But funnily enough, I would call myself probably, I would count myself in a similar corner probably, because my first question, as being someone that's probably in a bit of a similar situation without having that much experience in that space as you do, of course, is how long does it take you to kind of get that energy back? Because for myself, I feel like there's a direct correlation between the importance and intensity of this gathering and the amount of people and the time I need to kind of get back on track and kind of get that energy back.
Yeah.
So maybe from my perspective, is a large gathering with a very intense conversations going on, very many new people, I probably need a day, right, to get that energy back.
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit, because I think introvert, extrovert is a scale, and nobody's at 100 on either side. I think I did a quiz once with my whole team, just so we kind of knew where everyone stood. And I think I was like 60, where 100 was totally introverted, 60 was more introverted than extroverted. And I was in the 60s, which means there's still some extrovert parts to me. So when I do things like that, I do get some buzz out of it. It is kind of, especially when they're interesting people and they're talking about or wanting to talk about something about. There's a little ego boost in that. So I get some buzz out of it. But boy, when I would do like a public presentation and then one of those mixers afterwards, I would be really drained for at least a day. It might even be longer than that. You know, I didn't even think about it because I had to get up and go to work again the next day. And you just say, well, maybe I don't feel quite as on but I never tried to tie it back to what I had done the day before, because I don't run marathons. So I don't know what it feels like the day after a marathon, but people get up and go to work the day after a marathon too. So probably not much different than that.
Very true. And I think what helped you is also because you have a very calm demeanor, and whatever I think the half the dozen times we met personally, I always had the feeling that we basically picked up the conversations where we left off the last time,
Yeah.
right? No matter if it was in London or at this golf course close to London where we once met for the great CCO summit, which was also very fun. Fun fact, I think that was the first time I almost wrecked a golf cart, so quite funny.
It was
there was always
day.
Like this feeling, very funny, very funny. Shout out to everybody who was there.
Yes.
I saw a few names last week at the customer conference. I saw a few names pop up during the conference who were also there, so it was a great gathering. And I think that helped you probably, right? Being that what I always felt was like a sincere interest and this authentic demeanor where you thought, okay, we can actually pick up this conversation, and you memorized a lot of that. And so maybe I was in the lucky position that you kind of focused on me and had this conversation where we said, okay, let's just have this conversation and we can both kind of tune out everything else a bit, because it also helps me quite a bit.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of what you're talking about that's learned behavior as well. I'm guessing we never talked about sports, Stephen, but you're probably a sports fan to some degree as well. And one of the things I observed pretty early in my career as a sports fan was that teams reflect the personality and character of their coach. And if the coach is waving his arms and screaming at the referees or kicking the dirt or emotional, the team reflects that as well. But the best coaches don't do that because that's not where they want their team to spend their energy. So they don't spend their energy. So I always try to approach being a leader in the same way. I can't be panicked. I can't show how I feel when we miss our number and I want to kick the door in or whatever. I have to be calm and collected. Otherwise the team gets some permission to be out of control as well, or they panic because I'm panicking or whatever. And that just can't be a good situation. So I've always tried to kind of nurture that calm demeanor because I think it's a better way to be a leader. Not that you can't be a little rah-rah and inspirational. That's part of it as well. But under the surface, you can be churning all you want, but on the external, you got to be pretty calm.
Absolutely. And I think that's the tough part about being authentic, right? So finding that balance between being authentic and having that impression also to everybody that, okay, that's Dan speaking, that's Stephen speaking, that's whoever is in the room speaking, but keeping that calm, right? And I think it's also, to me, it also often comes down to, can you actually and truly identify with the role you inherited somehow, right? So if you're a manager of a team, no matter, for example, I spent a few years in the army as well, where I, since that time, think the leadership skills and the way of managing people doesn't actually change that much, right? So there is some kind of task at hand. There is a team that you need to motivate to do their best, right? No matter if it's physically demanding or in other ways demanding, you have to motivate them to get like the best result out of the task at hand. And you need to do that convincingly, right? And the tougher the situation is, the more your team will be able to tell what toll it takes also on you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's such a wise way to think about it, because leadership is leadership no matter what you're doing, whether you're leading a football team or you're leading a customer success team or you're leading a battalion, in the army. Leadership is leadership, and there is a large percentage of what it takes to be a great leader that crosses over no matter what kind of team you're leading.
Absolutely. And maybe going into that direction a bit, because I just had a great lunch meeting yesterday with an executive from a also Berlin-based SaaS company and a person from their operations team, revenue and success operations. And we had a conversation about also internal promotions, external hiring, and just finding the right talent, right? Who can identify with the role and who can also lead teams, build up teams, and the old question of, right, who can build a team and also lead the team? So how can I find both skills in one person? And there we had a long discussion about this topic: which ICs should you promote, right? How do you know if you're basically taking like the best person out of your team, which would be a great expert who everybody can benefit from? Or what for you personally, from your experience, maybe would be some indicators where you would say, okay, this individual contributor should maybe become a manager. Yeah, do you have some ideas on that?
Yeah, I do. And one of the things I think that you have to think about as a company, it's probably more of a company situation than an individual team, is that you have to create a structure where people who are great individual contributors can rise very, very high without being forced to manage people. Because you just described the worst mistake that can happen in a company is if I'm the boss, you take your best individual contributor and promote them to manager. And what often happens is you've lost your best individual contributor and you inherited a terrible manager. But it happens all the time because it's the only career path that looks like it can reward that high level of attainment for the individual contributor. And I'm like, I learned this because one of the first CSMs I ever hired was the best CSM I've ever seen in my life. She worked for Gainsight for several years. Her name is Elaine, if you're watching, Elaine. She came to me 3 weeks into the job and she said, Dan, I never want to manage people. And I said, well, wait, you're really good at this. And I want to be able to promote you. And she said, don't do that because it won't work out well for any of us. So I actually created tiers of promotion, levels of promotion for individual contributors. So I could promote her to what was at least equivalent to being a director, maybe not VP, because sooner or later, if you want to get to the top, that's the CEO job. You got to manage people. But people who don't want to do that know that there's some career limitation to that. But if you can give them a way to thrive financially and status wise, right? And by the way, you always look better as a manager when you promote people who are doing a really good job because everyone else knows it. And if you're not promoting them, I mean, you kind of want this situation where you promote someone and everyone goes, duh, they've been doing the job at the next level for the last year. By the way, little tip for those of you out there building your career, the way to get promoted to the next level is to start doing the job at the next level. And then sooner or later, no matter how dumb your manager is, they'll recognize it and they'll promote you. But I'm a big proponent of create a tier, create a promotion or a structure that allows individual contributors to get promoted to a pretty high level without forcing them into management because they're often not good managers. This is especially true in engineering. Right? You don't want to take a great engineer and make him into a bad manager. Nobody wins in that situation.
Absolutely. And I think you said something really great there about this doing the job before you actually get the job, right? Which is something, especially in Germany, for example, when I look at many of the teams, this is something many are a bit of reluctant to not fall into the trap of kind of doing that for the next 2 years, right? Where I also, from my experience, can say, to me, that was very beneficial, right? To just be there and do the job before you might also get a promotion. Especially in startup life, this is basically how it's happening, right? So most of the startup folks I know who at some point came into senior manager or executive roles, at some point did that for quite a while. And I think what I wanted to get back to what you said is that the piece where it's not necessarily about the management per se, but leverage your great individual contributors who might do a great job also for advancing the team, not just in promotion and not just team management, but also in projects, in process improvements, in, I don't know, tooling, innovation, right? Innovation might be a good word for that. and just allowing that, right? Because if that's happening, and you see during that time also that the person is able to manage a project where 3-4 other contributors might be part of it, that's already a good indicator. If somebody can lead a project for a while, that could also mean that they might be a good manager.
I think that's right. And, I say you create a structure where you can promote individual contributors without making them managers. But promoting them doesn't just mean keep doing a great job. I'm going to give them more responsibility. It may not be managing people, but I want you to be the point person with our product team, and you bring back all the leading edge product knowledge that they have and educate our team so that we're more prepared when the next release comes out, or things like that, right? So it's not just, keep making all of your customers happy like you have been. No, I'm going to promote you because you're really good at that. I know you're going to keep doing that really well, but I'm going to also give you some additional responsibility.
Absolutely. And looking at that, and you're saying so many great things out there, which from which I think many can benefit quite a bit, right? When building their first teams and when thinking about promotions and how to, and we might get to that also, the incentivization piece behind it. But from which experience would you say, how did you learn the most about this? From which point in your career?
Well, experience is the best teacher. Well, no, let me say that differently. Failure is the best teacher, and experience is basically failure, right? I think we do have success experiences, but I think those are a little dangerous because they make us think we're really good at what we do, and it may not have been us. So I think failure is one of the best teachers. I've got a lot of scars from having made mistakes, but I've also, we also learn what to do and what to not do by watching other people. And I'll give Nick, my CEO at Gainsight, a shout out, because I learned a lot of things from Nick. One of those is along the lines of what we're talking about, is Nick loved to promote people internally. And he did it based not only on what he thought that person could do, but what he knew he could do. Because he would promote people who weren't ready for the next level. And he knew it was going to take more out of him to coach that person up and make sure that they were successful in that job. But he was always willing to take on that task. And you really gain the confidence of your people when they see that more often than not you're promoting internally and you're actively managing people and helping them grow and become better in their career. So that is such a key skill, and it's one I learned by watching many people, but Nick is kind of the most recent one, and maybe the most obvious example for me of doing things like that.
Yeah, and shout out to Nick, right? So I met him a few times as well, and he always seemed like a very, very, also very authentic leader, right? And I think what I would say definitely connected both of you was a similar thing I said about you earlier, right? This remembering where we left off last time and let's pick up the conversation. This was always something where I thought, okay, somebody like Nick who meets like, I don't know, a few thousand people a year probably with similar conversations. And then you meet him in Auckland this year, next year in San Francisco, and you basically pick up the conversation there. Shows you like a decent and an honest interest in that conversation, which was always great.
Yeah.
Awesome. So looking at all these topics, and I think something that keeps on coming up, and I think we need to talk about this somehow as well, right? So with all the managerial skills you collected over the years, with all the change you managed, with the transformations you managed, everybody's now thinking about AI, right? So AI is the thing that's around the corner, or some companies already did their first trials with some AI solutions, or I don't know, might be moving on to another one already. So what's your thought on that topic when people are talking to their teams right now, right? And you have certain teams like maybe the BDR, SDR sphere, where the fear of AI is probably the worst right now, right? Yeah. And then in customer success, where also a lot of conversations are happening, what AI will do. What would be maybe one tip or hint you would give to a manager about how to pick up that conversation with their teams right now when this comes up?
Yeah, I think back to a word you've used a couple of times, Stephen, that's transparency. I think sharing what you know with your team in these situations, and what you know is probably more than what they know, because these kinds of strategic conversations happen at the management level, not at the individual contributor level. But if I was managing a team right now, let's say I had 10 kind of relatively junior customer success managers reporting to me, I would make sure they knew that AI is a real thing that's going to have a real impact on them. And there is a possibility that AI is going to take over some of the tasks that they are doing. And even probably someday, who knows how long, we will have AI agents doing some reasonable amount of a customer success manager's task or a BDR's task or millions of other jobs as well. But in the tech world, those are the two potentially low-hanging fruit. Customer support as well. So I want them aware of it. I don't want them to live their life in fear, but I do want them to be aware of it because I want them to be motivated to take a step up, right? We know when a new technology comes along and helps us do our job, it's helping us with what we would call the low-end tasks, the tedious, repetitive, kind of non-thinking tasks. Like in the world of customer support, you may remember the day when you forgot your password or something and you had to call somebody to get your password reset. Well, nobody calls anybody anymore, right? It's a link on the website. It's all automated, right? You get an email or a text or whatever. That's a good example of the kinds of things that AI is going to, whatever the lowest level task is in your current job, you should assume that 3 years from now, AI is going to be doing that, not you. And if that's the most important part of your job, you better make something else the most important part of your job. You got to step up to the next level and have a pep talk with yourself saying, I got to start doing things that there's no way AI could do, right? I got to understand customers in a way that AI could never understand them. I got to dig in and understand how they get value out of our product and what the metrics are that matter to them and how they want to be interacted with, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like somebody's chasing you and you got to stay one step ahead of them. And from a career standpoint, those kinds of motivations are scary, but you have to find something that pushes you. And if it's not self-motivation, then fear is a pretty good motivator. And I never managed by fear. I know people who have, and I hate it. I never managed that way, but there has to be something saying, and this, by the way, if you do startups, you have to live this way. Like if we're not working, I hate to put this in terms of how many hours we work, but I'll just say it that way as an exaggeration. If we're not working 16 hours a day, you can bet one of our competitors is, and we got to stay ahead of them. So there has to be urgency in every single thing you do every single day. And AI is going to create that for individuals. You got to have some urgency around stepping your game up so that you don't get replaced by some AI agent, because that will happen for sure.
Absolutely. And I think this is also what you said about the fear, right? Of course, you need some kind of motivation to do that, right? You need a driver. And I think I had a great conversation with a partner about this recently, about this whole change management topic, right? How you drive change. And that, of course, a good and a solid reason is the best motivator to do change, right? And also the best one to convince people to have to change. But especially, I think, in startups, and it's quite funny that you're sitting in Silicon Valley right now, I'm sitting close to Berlin, that there's also such a big difference sometimes in how startups in Silicon Valley and Berlin are run, and how also, coming back to this identification point, are perceived in a bit of a different light. Because everybody I know in Silicon Valley in startups which are successful, I think we might have to add, right? So that have significant growth, the grind is tough, right? And the grind is there, and the hours you mentioned are probably realistic. And a lot of what I'm seeing in Berlin is, I think, a good example for that, is that the grind is real for the founders and for probably a few select hires that have which we always call like the entrepreneurial mindset, right? To do the grind with them. But after that, it quickly falls down, right? And there's an understanding of the startup life, which might be more on the more positive side than the grind, which is fine, right? And which is fair enough. But this is, I think, a big difference on where you might understand why certain growth is possible and why in other areas this might not be possible, right? And I think this is still one big benefit. Well, if you can call it benefit, I don't know. Why Silicon Valley sometimes is ahead in that, because the whole identification with that is a bit different.
Yeah, I'd call it a characteristic. It may or may not be a benefit, but it's definitely a characteristic. And there's a really important aspect of this, which is when you're starting a company, you really do need people who have an entrepreneurial mindset. And you need people who can do multiple things really well. As you get bigger as a company, both of those things change, because let's say you get, I don't know what the right number is, but you get to 1,000-person company. Every person can't have the same entrepreneurial spirit that the first 10 employees had. And by the way, if everyone had that, you'd be stepping on each other and running into each other all the time, because one thing you need to do as your company grows is you need to define roles more clearly. So that person who's employee number 4, who could do a little bit of marketing and he could do some sales and then he could take care of customers and he knew how to wire up the internet and whatever else, incredibly valuable when you have 6 people. Probably a person who's pretty lost when you have 1,000 people, because you would have to ask that person, what is it that you actually want to do? Do you want to just be an SE? Do you want to be a salesperson? Do you want to be a support person? And they know their value is being able to do a little bit of all of those things. And I've coached those people and I've said, you know what? We're at a stage where we don't need that jack of all trades in the same way as we did before. Let's find you a different company that's at that startup stage where you love it and they're going to love you, right? I think as good managers, we have to be helping our employees find a different job when that's the right thing to do. Because keeping someone around who isn't good or doesn't fit very well is not a favor to them, nor is it a favor to your team. So you have to really think about that. And I've always said at some point a company gets big enough where you have to start making room for employees who want to work really hard from 9 to 5 and go home to their families, right? Everyone's not going to sleep in the office when you have 1,000 people, and expecting that is the wrong expectation. And it wouldn't work anyway, because you just can't have that many people with that level of intensity trying to make everything happen. But you definitely need that the first 25, 30, 40 employees. I don't know what the number is, but it's really a scale. You know, it starts with this super high level of intensity with the founders. And even the 10th employee probably doesn't have it quite at that same level. So it kind of just diminishes slowly over time. The good news is, as you get bigger as a company, if you're successful, you can reinvigorate pockets of entrepreneurship, where you can take people and say, let's treat this new product as a startup. Go break things. Good companies do this all the time. Google always was famous for having the group of people they call the moonshot people. They were always doing something brand new that had nothing to do with search, trying to break into new parts of the market. And I think good companies figure out how to do that to keep those employees around and to generate new lines of business and new opportunities. And if you look at Google as an example, one of the things that's come out of that is the driverless car, right? They set some people aside and said, let's go figure that problem out. Now, you can do that when you have huge printing presses in your basement that are printing money every day. That's the search part of their business. It just prints money, like unbelievable amounts of money. So when they say, I think I'm going to take, I don't know, $30 billion and go build a driverless car, they can actually do that. But success breeds success, but you have to continue to develop that entrepreneurial opportunity for people who want to do that. And if you can do that inside your company and keep those great people around, everybody wins in that deal.
And I think even what you said about like also changing positions and maybe roles or companies, even I think that's true internally and externally, right? This willingness, and this also comes back to like transparency and authentic leadership probably as well, where you kind of say, okay, maybe we even tried you in a manager role. And I had a few of these situations in my line of work as well, right? So you earlier said that you learn most from failures. Absolutely true, right? So I think the biggest learnings are from that. Also, if you promote people into roles where they might not have been ready for, or probably didn't even know themselves if that is the right way to go, right? But you sometimes fall into the trap of promoting people into leadership roles, which might not be suited for that. And being honest enough and transparent enough and opening up and allowing people to also understand, okay, this might have not been the right direction. Let's find you another place, right? In the company or outside of the company where we can say, okay, this is the right way to go. Then I think this is also very helpful for everybody, right? Because in the end, if you can't identify with a role, if you can't be successful in the role, there's probably not much sense in sticking with that role for the next years, right? Because you will suffer probably personally, the company will probably suffer because you cannot perform on the level you would love to. So I think finding a solution for that is always helpful.
Yeah, I think as a leader, you just kind of triggered this in my head, Stephen. As a leader, you have to be really perceptive when you promote somebody or bring somebody into a higher level role than they've been in before. You have to pay really, really close attention to them. And you have to be able to discern the difference between they made a mistake and they're not good at this job.
Yeah.
Those can be really different things. And you have to be pretty close to them to understand which of those are just a mistake of not having done this before versus they're just not good with people. So let's not have them manage people or
Absolutely.
whatever the case might be. So I think as a leader, your intensity level has to go up when you promote people or bring people into higher level positions, because you really have to have your finger on the pulse there for a while. And then hopefully if it was the right hire or the right promotion, then you can back off and just let those people cook, as we like to say, I guess.
And it's not a binary topic, right? So many of us have worked with people or seen people develop in roles where you probably would not have imagined what great managers they would develop into, right? Especially in engineering, I saw that a few times. So many don't know that, but at some point I was coming from an engineering background. I was never such a great engineer. Otherwise, I probably would still be one, but I dipped my toes into the engineering world. And especially there, right? Sometimes I was just surprised kind of to what length people would go to kind of also be successful in a role. So
right.
Especially there, I thought. Maybe coming back to the AI topic we had a little bit, right? So looking into kind of what change there might be and how teams would manage that. Talking about customer success, basically, right? Because that's kind of our shared or common denominator from our backgrounds is I always, at least to this point, I think customer success in many companies and organizations can be looked at as being one of three or multiple of these three pillars, right? So you're either from the more support side, right? So very transactional, reactive side of things, right? Hoping and of course driving to more proactivity, the more salesy side of things, and the, I would call, consultative side of things, right? So the very probably with a consulting background and trying to figure that out. And of course, there's overlaps, right? And I think especially in more complex settings, you might have more of the consultative, prescriptive approach with a little bit of a sales side of things. The reactive support side of things, hopefully, is going a bit out of that picture, as at least for the actual customer success management. But looking at that picture and maybe using that analogy, where do you think CSMs can benefit the most from getting this AI support, right? Maybe looking especially at the more sales, upsell, cross-sell, and consultative, prescriptive approach of guiding customers proactively. How do you think they could benefit the most from looking into AI or where AI may develop into?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for AI, some of which will happen quickly. Some of it probably will not happen nearly as quickly as we think. But I think there's a couple of obvious areas. Like if you're a customer success manager, and let's say you have 30 or 40 clients that you're responsible for, what is it that would make your life easier? By the way, this is kind of the core assumption in all the customer success tools. And that is here's the way I thought about it as a manager. When I first managed customer success people, what I found out was it was really clear that every customer we talked to was better off at the end of that conversation than they were at the beginning of the conversation. The question for me as a boss was that the customer that most needed our time for the last hour that we talked to them? So it's all about prioritization, right? It's not, are you doing a good job? It's, are you doing a good job with the right customer in this particular example? And I think AI can help with that. Now, we've made some progress with customer success tools in looking at data and using that data to alert the customer success manager that something has gone wrong with this customer, or something's going really well and we should sell them some more licenses, right? Wrong, let's go correct it. Right, let's go sell them some more. That's not binary, but we can try to think about it that way. So we did that with data. We looked at data and said, this customer hasn't logged in 3 weeks. We better call them because that's not a good thing, right? I think AI will just take that to the next level where it can manage much larger sets of data and glean what we would typically call sentiment out of those things. So here's the lowest hanging fruit, I think, in customer success for AI. And I've worked with a company that's doing this, so I've seen it work. And that is, we often survey our customers to basically find out what they think of us. I think the whole idea of surveys and NPS surveys is going to go away because today, not next year, but right now, today, you can bring an AI agent, whatever you want to call it, in, and you can feed it every single recorded call that you've ever had with all customers, every single email that you've ever interacted with every customer, all the text that's in all the support tickets from all those customers, all the context of when you have done surveys, what they've said to you on those surveys, et cetera, et cetera. Huge amounts of data. And in about 8 seconds, an AI properly programmed can tell you whether that customer is positive sentiment or negative sentiment and all sorts of gradients in between. And that's a way more robust sentiment score, if you will, than a twice a year NPS survey where you catch the person who responds on a really bad day and they give you a 2 instead of a 7. And oh, by the way, the response rate on the survey is 4%. Whereas the AI way that I just described is every single customer, every single interaction. And by the way, we record every call with every customer and prospect these days. We did that because as managers, we thought, oh, good, then I'll be able to go and listen to those calls to see how my team is doing. Guess what doesn't happen? Listening to those calls. It never happens. But guess who can listen to all of those calls in about 5 seconds? The AI can. So it is the most obvious low-hanging fruit, which has real value. Like it can come up with real sentiment for every single customer. And even if there are those of you out there doing customer success and you don't have a health score, this could be just your health score. Now, it's not a very robust health score because it doesn't take into account how they're using your product and all that. But at least if someone's screaming, in a voice recording and using foul language and saying bad things about your company, AI can tell you that customer probably needs some attention. So I think that's a pretty obvious low-hanging fruit. The other thing, I think everyone's doing this now, and that is I've watched technology for years and years and years, but I was recently startled to see the summary of a meeting that an AI bot did. And it's like, it got everything right. And it got a lot of nuanced things right. It got a lot of things right that you wouldn't get out of a secretary who took notes on the meeting. It's amazing to me. So this idea of summarizing meetings, the next step of that is pretty simple, pushing those summaries into the right system, whether that's Gainsight or Salesforce or whatever it might be, distributing that to the people that were in the meeting so that they all have their action items, because actions come out of those meetings that you want people to take. Think about if I'm a CSM and I conduct one of those meetings, now I don't have to do the follow-up email because AI can do that for me, and the summary that gets plugged into Salesforce, which I would otherwise have to type in. These are real things that have to be done. And if they're done by somebody other than me, that makes me, in theory, more productive to do higher level things. So I think that's the starting point for AI. And I don't know what the ending point is. I'm not smarter than a lot of other people on this, but the capabilities of AI are, I think, I don't want to be too hyperbolic about it, but I think perhaps the most disruptive aspect of technology that I've seen, and I've been doing this for 40 years, which means I saw the birth of the internet, which has kind of changed our lives, wouldn't you say, just slightly? and the birth
Just
and
a
the
little
birth
bit.
of the
Yeah.
and the birth of the mobile phone. You put those two
Yeah.
things together, and that is the most dramatic change I've ever seen. But I think AI has the capacity potentially to even be bigger. Now, there's I think it's fair to talk about the downside of AI. What can it do? What can it do? I think the hype, this is a Silicon Valley thing. We live through it all the time. The hype is always way ahead of the reality, right? The internet is a perfect example. I went to a startup in 1997, which is about exactly the day that the dot-com bubble started, and it lasted until 2001, which is how long I was at that company. So if I write about the dot-com thing, it's not because I read about it, it's because I lived it. I was in the middle of it.
Suffered through it,
And
probably.
glorified and suffered both, right? It was the greatest thing in the world for a while, and then it was not good for a while.
Yeah.
But here's the reality. Like, the hype was the internet's going to change the world. The internet is going to change the world, man. Everything's going to be done over the internet. 20 years later, we laughed because there were companies like pets.com that thought that everyone in the world was going to buy their pet food online. And there was companies like Webvan that failed miserably, that were thinking that people would order their groceries online and get them delivered to them. Those companies went down in a pile of ashes. Were those stupid ideas? Apparently not, because we all buy our pet food and get our groceries online today, right? It was just a little bit too early. This is the whole idea of entrepreneurship. If you're an entrepreneur and you're a startup person, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be a little bit too early.
Yeah.
There were 2 companies I'll mention that came about in the dot-com era that were also too early, but figured out how to survive. One is a little company called Amazon.com. The other is a tiny company called Salesforce.com. Both started in the late 90s. In the year 2000, both companies almost couldn't make payroll for several months in a row. They were that close to going under. And today, the combined market cap of those 2 companies is somewhere around $2 trillion. They were ahead of their time, but they figured out how to survive. And it turns out the internet kind of matters. And you can buy pet food online, and you can get groceries and a whole millions of things that we never thought possible. So I think, excuse me, AI is going to go the same route. There's a ton of companies doing things with AI today that 10 years from now, we're going to laugh. Like, that was stupid.
Yeah.
I can't believe they thought that was a real company. But 20 years from now, that is going to be a real company, maybe a different company, but the same idea, right? It's just going to take longer. And Gardner has written about this for years, what they call the cycle. It's basically the cycle of a startup. And it's the hype cycle first, and then what they call the trough of disillusionment, when things are still happening, but there's no hype around it. And then you come out of that. So you start up going up really fast, and you go down a little bit. And over time, a much lower angle of ascent, you end up way, way higher than where you started, because there's truth out there. It's just going to take a while to get there. So I think we'll make a ton of mistakes with AI. It won't show the ROI that everyone thinks in the next 7 months, but sometime it's absolutely going to change our lives in the same way that the internet plus the mobile phone did.
Absolutely. And I think where you're absolutely right is that you kind of have to have the impression that it's much bigger, because it kind of keeps surprising us in such a speed, right? And it's just like every second week, I think you read something, you do something, you test out a new AI system or a new agent or whatever you come across, and you kind of think, oh my God, I wouldn't have thought that this would actually work that well, right? You mentioned these meeting notes, for example, right? So I saw really bad ones, right? I was really struggling at first to find a tool that could record my calls in English and German. I found several ones which did it great in English, right? But they kind of lost all touch to kind of what happened in the meeting once you switch the language of the meeting, right? Nowadays, I think it's not even an issue anymore, right? This is just a matter of weeks until many of these things are solved. And this is why I think where you touched a few times on the whole value topic, which is the topic that's probably the most dearest to my heart, because the longest role I had in customer success so far was in a very complex environment, right? It was process management. It was so many use cases, different verticals, and different complexities also in the outcomes they also expected from your tools, right? Where some of the things you mentioned were like most of us do are focused on what can I measure in my data, what can I measure on the interactions with my company, how can I tell if those interactions have a good quality, right? And if the interactions in the product are done, if they are of a quality I can measure somehow, right? Which is super important for most of the tools out there, and you can kind of have a correlation on the customer health. What's your thought? And this would also be interesting with the whole AI thing, right? And the direction it might take. Where do you think it will take us in looking at these actual outcomes for the customers, right? So looking at, maybe for everybody out there as an example, right? You might have somebody that leverages a tool from a vendor and the adoption is high and the users are giving positive NPS. Everything is great. But the actual benefactor of that inside of the customer's company might be some executive that had, of course, some kind of agenda introducing that tool, right? So there was, I don't know, wanted to increase efficiency or had to do some certifications or increase revenue or something like that. And how you kind of connect that to that person's interest, what the outcome should be they connect. And I'm super curious, and of course, I'm also digging into that topic with a few ideas. How can you connect that, right? So the vendor perspective, the CSM's perspective, and then the customer interest, which might not be connected to the tool whatsoever.
Yeah, it's a huge topic, but it's super important, Stephen. It's funny because you've been around long enough too that when customer success started, because customer value became something that had to be measured and had to be real. Because I come from the early software days where we sold software and we sold it up front for a huge price. We collected all the money up front. And in that particular scenario, we didn't really care whether the customer used our product or not because we already had all their money. Now that sounds really callous, and it's really not true because we did care.
Was true for a while.
We didn't really care. We didn't care enough to do anything about it. But when SaaS came along, in particular, the subscription pricing model, that changed everything because now you need to earn the money literally every month or every year or every day. So customer value used to be based on the relationship, right? I really like you guys. That was the customer's statement of customer value. I really like you guys. Maybe if they were really, really nice, they said, I really like your product, although our products probably weren't that likable. But think about that as a customer value statement. I really like you guys. Well, back in the day when we sold you my software for $8 million, and then you spent another 8 implementing it and building a data center to house it, you weren't going to churn. Not for 20 years. You just spent $16 million to get our software up and running. I joked all the time, like after all of that time, we turned the system on and the first user would log in and they'd go, I really don't like this. This user interface is awful. Well, we solved that problem. We just fired that person, right? You don't like the software, you're out, because we're not changing. We're not churning. We got 20 years of this, right? Now we in a real world where it's no longer, I like you guys. That's not a customer value statement. It's like, you said we were going to get 4.2x ROI in 7 months. We got 3.9. What the heck is wrong? We got to fix this. That's the ideal. Now, the reality is somewhere in between for both the vendor and the customer. Customers have a hard time measuring things. Vendors have a hard time measuring things, especially ROI. It's this very ephemeral thing that we're trying to get our fingers around, like trying to grab a cloud or something like that. But you have to try. This is one of my preaching to all customer success teams. You better have some metrics that your customer agrees are proxies for the value that they want to get out of your product. And you better be maniacal about measuring that and managing that. I think we do that with a hammer these days, and it probably should be done with a scalpel, but you got to do it in some way. And I think what AI is going to do is it's going to help reshape our hammers into scalpels, So we don't have to pound. We can do these little tiny cuts or little tiny actions, I should say, with customers. And I think, customers are always under the gun, whether they say it or not. If they bought your software, they have the CFO looking over their shoulder at all times, because one day that CFO is going to say, what are we getting for the €1,000,000 that we're spending on that software? And if you can't answer that question, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, if not out on your bottom. So, and the customer success manager on the other side is in the same spot. If that customer isn't getting value and doesn't understand the value they're getting, then you're going to be in trouble, because they're going to be likely to churn. And I think I can't specifically say this is what AI is going to do, but I look at all technology, and it always enhances our ability to have better insights, better interactions, and more effective and efficient processes of working with our customers. So it's going to make all of that better, if for no other reason than it does all of the meeting notes and putting things in Salesforce and summaries and all that I don't have to do, where I can spend more time truly understanding where my customer is and what they're trying to accomplish and whether they're actually getting value out of it. So I think it's just a spectrum, right? And we're going to move up that spectrum more slowly than we probably want to, more slowly than the hype would say. But boy, when we look back 10 years from now, we're going to say it's a different world, even though it's like raising children. Every day you look at them, they don't look any different than they did the day before. But then you look at a picture of them when they're 4 and now they're 8, and they're like, it's a completely different person, right? And technology is often that way too. It's these little incremental steps. And every once in a while we get a glimpse, wow, this could be a big deal, but we're just grinding step by step by step. And then the next thing you know, we've got a supercomputer in our hands that's giving AI responses to our questions about who's won the most Academy Awards in the history of whatever, right? It's unbelievable. And we're going to feel the same way. And AI is going to make all of that better and faster and more efficient and whatever. And I can't tell you, I'd start the company if I knew exactly what that was going to look like. But
I joined.
But I know for sure it's going to happen. I just don't know exactly how it's going to happen or how fast.
Absolutely. And I think it starts kind of where, and I had a lot of great conversations with a great few folks out there who are also looking to this whole like customer-led growth topic, right? Of understanding, okay, how can I actually make sure that the whole organization is playing a part in that? And in a small group of people, we basically joked around a little bit recently, but not really, because there was a serious aspect of it, was about, isn't the one thing we actually need at some point, isn't that something like the chief value officer or something like that, who is truly understanding the impact we're having, right? Who is understanding how to market it, how to put it into the product, how to sell it, basically everywhere in the company, and really make sure, probably maybe connected to like an evangelization role or understanding, identification, right? To really say, okay, this is actually what we kind of need, right? Because then we can also, and from practice, I can tell you some companies today haven't really understood whether they're like a necessity or commodity, right? And you have to have an understanding of that before you understand how you can go about pricing and, I don't know, maybe contractual changes and these things. So what do you think about that? Do we kind of need someone with a general role of outcomes or value in the company?
Yeah, I think we do. And by the way, I think we have that role at every single company. It's called the CEO.
Yeah.
The person who lives and breathes every day on, are we going to survive? And the only way we survive is if our product actually adds value to the customer. Now, what happens is that has to be the CEO role, because it has to tie marketing and sales and product and engineering and customer success and support all together. So that's the CEO's job. And he is always the chief evangelist as well. Even when I had the chief evangelist title, I always said, I'm not really the chief evangelist. I'm second in command, because the CEO has to be the chief spokesman for the company. But I do think this, what we today call the chief customer officer, is the point person for that customer value idea. The CEO really owns that, but he or she can't do everything at the level that needs to be done. And I think when I was chief customer officer, that was my North Star. That was my guiding light. We measured it by net revenue retention as an example, because net revenue retention takes into account two things: are customers staying with us, i.e. not churning, and are they buying more from us?
Yeah.
Those are the two biggest statements of value, because value is reflected by somebody's checkbook. Nobody buys more licenses unless they're getting value out of the licenses they already bought. Nobody renews their contract more than once if they're not getting value out of what they paid for. So the person who's responsible for renewal and upsell, or enabling renewal and upsell, not the actual contract, is the chief customer officer. And that person is basically measuring and living day to day on the value that the customers are getting. Because part of their job is also not just measuring that and working with the customers, but going back to sales and saying, hey, you guys are overselling the product. You're demoing a product that doesn't work the way we demo it, et cetera, et cetera. Also, going back to the product team and saying, hey, our customers are not getting the value out of the product because it doesn't do this, 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 and this, right? So that central point of the point of the spear, what I call the point of the spear, is the person who sits between the product and the customer. And that is the customer success manager or the customer success team. And that's the most important point in the entire company, because you build a product to make money, you sell it to customers because they're willing to pay money. And the interaction point between those two things is the most important element of any company, right? So if you don't get that right, you lose. So you have to have someone responsible for that. And so I think that chief customer officer really is the chief value officer, knowing that value isn't created by them, but it's created by them putting pressure on the rest of the company to make a better product, to sell it more effectively, to support it better, right?
Love it. I couldn't have wished for probably a better answer, and I love it. And I've been a chief customer officer myself, right? And I loved that role. And what I loved about that specific role was that we looked at the net retention number, and that was like our guiding number, which was important because we also had, and this is what I loved about this specific role, is we also had account management inside of that customer success team, right? So we had a portion which supported that, and to this point, it's still something I love, because the collaboration between customer success management and that account management function just worked so well, and caused some great up and cross sales. So I was a big fan of that. But looking at that, and also maybe looking at the time, and also having gained so many great insights from you and making this super fun, I could go on for probably 4 hours, but then we
definitely
probably would be standing at a bar like in recent years. Looking at that, and maybe this was a great segue, and could be maybe our last controversial thing we look into, is looking at that and looking into customer success somewhere in around B2B SaaS, or in tech anyway. Looking into the future, 5 years, what you just said about like the chief customer officer, the CEO, the value understanding, will we still have that in 5 years? Will what you just said still be true in 5 years, or will something drastically change about that?
Yeah, I think the idea that we're talking about will absolutely still be here, because there's never going to be a time where there aren't vendors and customers have to value the product that they're paying for. So that idea of customer value through some mechanism is going to be around forever. And as long as there are people doing jobs, which I think is never going to be completely replaced by AI, you're going to have, I don't know what the title will be, but we're going to have people who are interacting with customers to make sure our product works. Because if you designed and sold the perfect product, you wouldn't need any support people, and you wouldn't need any customer success people, because the product would install itself, it would configure itself, it would teach the user how to use it, it would correct any mistakes that were being made, it wouldn't have any bugs in it, it wouldn't need anyone to show the customer how to use it. Now, as far as I can tell, we've never even approached that. And by the way, we're solving more and more complex problems, which means the solution has to be more and more complex. Like, we don't need education anymore for someone to use Microsoft Word when we first put it out, somebody had to teach somebody how to use it. We don't need to do that anymore. So what we would call simpler products aren't going to need that, but the more complex products, and if we're solving complex problems, we have to build complex products, are always going to need that. So whether it's called a customer success manager or not, I don't know, but there will be people, I think, at that inflection point between the product and a customer to make sure the customers are getting value. And I think I've said this for years, and it's kind of slowly becoming true. It's going to be more important than ever because the pricing model continues to change. You know, we talked earlier about what we used to call one-time fees for software. Then we moved to subscription fees, and many companies are already moving towards consumption. I think that movement is going to continue. And if you think about that, the consumption model is different from the subscription model in a very significant way. And that is, in the subscription model, let's say it's a monthly model, customer renews their contract every month because they want to keep using your product. In the consumption model, the customer pays you only when they use your product. So think about that. The customer success manager, if we use that title, is more important because all of the revenue is driven by the usage of the product. None of it is driven by selling the product. It's all driven by somebody using the product. The question that it begs is, are we going to have salespeople 5 years from now when all of the revenue is derived from the customer using the product? None of it is derived by us selling the product. That's going to change something very dramatically. If nothing else, the comp plans for salespeople, because think about how easy it is to sell something. If I say to you, Stephen, hey, try it out. If it works, great, keep using it. If it doesn't work and you don't use it, guess what? You never have to write us a check.
Yeah.
Right?
The return of the free trial.
Exactly. That's exactly right, which isn't free. By the way, some of the biggest companies in the world operate in this model. Amazon Web Services, you contract them with computers and routers and whatever else, connectivity. And then when you need more, they just put another server on the rack, right? So it's a consumption model. It's obviously something that the world is kind of ready for. And by the way, in most parts of our life, everything is a consumption model. We don't buy more Cheerios until we run out of Cheerios. And if we don't like Cheerios, we don't buy any more Cheerios, right? So This is the real world that we're talking about. It's also the world that holds the customer accountable or holds the vendor more accountable. It also creates the largest revenue stream. If your product really works and the customer uses the heck out of it, your revenue goes up like that. So I think that's where we're going, which makes whoever is the person, whatever title we give them, that helps that customer use our product more often, makes them more important. And it makes them so much easier to measure. Because now the measurement of a CSM is, did we make more money today than we did yesterday? And the answer better be yes, because the customer should be using our product more today than they did yesterday, right? That's not where we are today, but I think that's where we're going. And if we get there, I think everybody wins in that model. A customer doesn't have to pay for something that doesn't work, and they pay a lot for things that really do work.
And at that point, still somebody will need to talk to you about whether your robot is doing the job you got it for, right? So there will still be a person that will talk to you about that.
I think that's right. Yeah, someone's tuning that AI all the time. And who better to tune it than somebody who really understands how our product works and understands that customer's use case, right? So there's going to be a self-tuning that goes on. That's one of the promises of AI. But there's still people behind that AI. Those models have to be taught, right? Somebody has to kind of input the data that says, here's how we want that AI to act with the customer in this situation. So there will be places for smart people who understand how products work and how customers get value out of them. That's the core of every company. How does customer get value out of your product?
Yeah, and I think that's a topic that's also still underestimated, right? How much of that AI in the future needs to be focused on your data, on your company, and make it safe and secure, and that it doesn't end up in some general AI. I think that's still a bit underestimated when companies also are looking at AI, but of course, a lot have that on their radar.
Right.
Dan, it's been amazing, and I know you've got a lot of things to do. I don't know how many boards you're sitting nowadays, but I know you're busy. You're doing a lot of great things, and it's been a great honor to have you on board. I hope you had a great time, and if nothing else, great to reconnect over this, and yeah, have something to talk about next time. Hope you had a great time.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. This was a blast. It's obvious we could talk for several more hours, and someday we probably will. But our audience's attention span probably isn't quite that long. So I hope everybody out there enjoyed this. I certainly did. It was great reconnecting with you, Stephen. I'm really happy that you invited me to do this.
Me too. Thank you. And even our prep calls were already so much fun that we went
Yeah,
a bit
for sure.
over on those. So
For sure.
talk again soon. It's been great, Dan. Have a great day.
Yeah.
It's quite early morning for you. So speak soon. Have a great day, and yeah, have a good evening. And for everybody
so much.
else, thank you so much for dialing in. And it's a wrap for today. If you didn't get any value out of this session, I don't know, because there was so much. And having Dan on this, and having Dan share so much of his experience and his no BS approach on customer success and companies he's works with, that's what drove me always to also finding and looking for guidance from his side. So thank you for joining today. Thanks for being part of this. We will be back next Wednesday again at 5 p.m. CET. We will be announcing our next guest tomorrow. And until then, remember, the journey never ends to customer value and beyond. Bye-bye.